Hello and welcome back to any returning listeners. If you're new to the podcast, my name is Hardiel Pinto, and I last year I started my own small business called Pulp Cereal, where I distribute movie serials, TV shows, and films, all with roots in pulp fiction. This is my podcast, One on One, where I take someone I admire on social media and I force them to be my friend for a half an hour. Today I have M from Verbal Diorama.
Hello.
How you doing today?
I'm really good, thanks. Sorry, I wasn't really sure how to introduce myself. It's just just a hello, I guess. I'm really well. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. It's morning here still. I mean, it's like 11. That time difference always takes me for a loop still.
Yeah, I've recorded a couple of things with sort of people over in sort of your area of the woods, sort of California, and it's very weird to have you in the morning and me in the evening. It's strange.
Yeah, because I still haven't eaten breakfast. I mean, that's my lazy fault. I still haven't eaten breakfast yet, but it's like dinner time for you over there.
Yeah, and I haven't eaten dinner, so we're in the same
Okay,
situation.
there we go. Okay, that's even. Okay, so I think the first thing we're definitely going to talk about, because I mean I usually don't have planned things on here, but I think we definitely both want to talk about that Jungle Cruise trailer.
Yes, we do. We talked about that very recently, didn't we? On Twitter when it came out, because you and I both have a vested interest in these sorts of movies. It seems.
Exactly, because I mean I should have included in the intro, but definitely, if nobody who listens to my show has heard your show, you have definitely covered several adventure pulp films, and I think that's what got me hooked onto your show when I listened to the Sky Captain World of Tomorrow episode.
Yeah, and the thing is, and I'll be genuine and honest because I always try to be genuine and honest in everything. I didn't even know what pulp cinema was until I spoke to you. Genuinely, I just thought they were movies that I just enjoyed. I didn't know there was that they had essentially their own genre, and that all of these movies that I enjoyed sort of fell into that remit. I genuinely had no idea. So I feel like you've actually taught me quite a lot of interesting facts and knowledge because it's stuff I didn't even know.
I don't know, up until a few years ago, I was the same way. I would always see certain things, and I would think, well, I really like that aesthetic. Like there was that video game on PlayStation 3 that came out like I think a decade ago, called Dark Void, where the main character has a jetpack, and I remember thinking like that looks familiar because it was like a very 1940s based game, and I just remember thinking, I like that aesthetic. I don't know what that is, but I can sense that I'm drawn to it. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I started learning about pulp.
Yeah, and it I find it all really fascinating, to be honest. And it just so happened that I'd covered obviously Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow, and then it was almost kind of a natural progression for me to kind of move on to something like The Mummy because of how much I love it. And then it wasn't until I spoke to you and obviously realized that the Sky Captain and the Rocketeer and Captain America the First Avenger and all of these, they're all kind of intrinsically linked with pulp cinema. And it kind of blew my mind a little bit, to be honest, because I was like, I didn't really know what I was enjoying, just that I enjoyed them.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of crazy when you first start researching and realizing that all this stuff started at like basically the turn of the century. Um, Essentially, it started over where you're at before it became an American thing. It started off with penny dreadfuls over there, started that kind of trend of very cheap books printed on very cheap paper, and they were sold for not a lot of money because they were stories basically for the working class people, and that's why they were kind of looked down upon even today. I mean, when you think about it, they kind of are still looked down upon, even though they make $100 million productions out of these types of stories now.
Yeah, but I think the main issue with it is that I think if people actually understood the legacy of pulp cinema, that maybe they would actually appreciate things like Sky Captain a little bit more, because I've always felt with a movie like Sky Captain, it has this ability to be essentially, it could have easily been a franchise. It could have been the MCU of its time, really, because it had this beautiful aesthetic, it had this wonderful, talented, beautiful cast, and but people just didn't see it, and they just weren't interested in it. And it's very much the same with Captain America: The First Avenger. It's still one of the sort of lowest ranking movies in the MCU. Like, people didn't really get interested in Captain America up until kind of the Avengers. And then you kind of look back and you see that there's this wonderful movie that's just kind of sitting there. And I still think it doesn't get the appreciation it deserves. And I think that if people knew a lot more about Pulp, that maybe people would actually appreciate it. But that's why I think when we talk about Jungle Cruise, obviously it's got some really big stars. It's based on a ride at Disney, similar to Pirates of the Caribbean, which was obviously massive. And I'm hoping that people really get behind Jungle Cruise.
Exactly, because I would not mind seeing several of those starring Emily Blunt. I'm more than okay with that. I really liked seeing her in the trailer. I think she definitely captured that pulp spirit. She definitely had that kind, because I feel like there's a specific type of charm when it comes to adventure pulps like that. I think she captured it really well. My only concern is, I mean, as much as I like The Rock, I feel like he has his own specific brand of charm, and I just wasn't feeling him in this trailer specifically. He felt a little too contemporary to me.
Yeah, I think the Rock is an interesting choice, but I do think that, when I first saw the Jungle Cruise trailer, the first thing that instantly popped into my head was The Mummy, because it invokes a very similar feel to The Mummy. It's got that kind of spunky heroine. It's got the kind of dashing hero that, we would expect to find. And I think that Emily Blunt, I mean, she is always outstanding. And I've literally just done an episode on Edge of Tomorrow. And obviously, I know it's not Pulp, but it's such a fantastic movie, and she is literally the linchpin, I think, that holds the movie together. She's so good and sort of a little bit underrated, I think, as well. But I think she's definitely got kind of the Evie Carnahans about her, and Evie Carnahan is a character that I have loved for 20 years, and I'm hoping that kind of this generation feel the same about Emily Blunt's character. And I think where The Rock is concerned, I'm not all that concerned for him, because he has a very kind of natural charisma. And there's not many movies that he's done that I would quite happily say I would never watch again. There's probably like maybe one or two movies that he's done that I'd say, oh, I'll never watch that again. But I would watch a movie just to see The Rock, and to see that kind of, because he oozes charisma, and he's a very kind of the sort of guy that you could quite easily, get to know and be friends with. And I feel like the trailer that we saw specifically focused on Emily Blunt, and I think that was a really good decision, to kind of get her a bit more involved, because I think when it comes to this movie, I think that people are going to see it more for her than for him. But I think we'll see what happens, because it's not out for a long time. So I think we'll see what happens on that.
And I think it's interesting because apparently I was watching a video on it, and apparently the day the trailer came out was the original release date for the movie, but for some reason they pushed it back until next summer.
Do you know why?
I'm not sure. I don't know. As much as
Okay.
I do like that Disney, especially over the last 20, I mean more than the last 20 years, but I've noticed it over the last 20 years, they do try to keep these adventure pulp stories alive, but they don't always necessarily know how to market them.
Mm.
Kind of like with John Carter, or the
Yeah.
Lone Ranger movie that came out the year after that. Have you ever seen that movie?
Which one? The Lone Ranger?
Yeah.
Um, I've seen bits of it. I distinctly remember seeing um, scenes with Army Hammer on a horse. And I mean, I think it's one of those movies that I really do want to actually sit down and watch in its entirety, because I do think that I would definitely find things to enjoy. Because when I look at any movie, I always try and look at the positives. And I always try and find something to enjoy. And obviously, you mentioned John Carter, which generally is quite reviled, and I don't know why, because it's actually quite good. And there's a lot to love. But like you say, I think that Disney had this property, that was 100 years old, and it had so much history behind it, and it could have been literally one of the biggest things they'd ever done, and it they just didn't know what to do with it. And yeah, I think you're right about the Lone Ranger, because I was never interested really in seeing the Lone Ranger. And to be honest, I don't know if that's got a little bit maybe to do with Johnny Depp, because I have a bit of a contentious thing about Johnny Depp. I liked him in Pirates of the Caribbean, thought he was excellent. Um, but I don't know, I'm always a little bit put off by the newer stuff that he's done. So that might be a little bit of a factor, but I'll certainly give it a look when I find it. And I'll let you know what I think.
Okay, because I'm actually not the biggest fan of the Lone Ranger movie, um, but basically, because it is from the same director of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, Gore Verbinski, and
Yeah.
he basically does the things that I didn't like about Pirates of the Caribbean, but I feel like he does it even worse in the Lone Ranger because what I don't like about Pirates, I don't like Jack Sparrow. Like I like Orlando Bloom. I like Keira Knightley. I don't like Jack Sparrow because what they do with that character is they take that kind of what should be that charming pulp hero and they turn it on its head and they try to make it clever and they make him like a bumbling fool alcoholic that I feel like you're supposed to laugh at, and I don't find enjoyment in that. I think that's a little pessimistic, and they do that even worse in the Lone Ranger. Army Hammer the entire time is the bumbling fool, and the Johnny Depp Tonto character is supposed to be the smart one, and he just kind of treats Army Hammer like garbage the whole movie. And there's even at one point in the film, I think it's at the end of the movie, where Army Hammer has finally become the Lone Ranger, and he bucks the horseback, and he says his catchphrase, "Hi ho, Silver," and then Johnny Depp tells him never say that again, and then the Lone Ranger literally apologizes for saying his own catchphrase.
Oh, that sounds a bit strange. I don't, and oh, obviously I've not seen the movie, but why would he not be allowed to? Is it just like an embarrassment thing for the Johnny Depp character, or I wouldn't. I don't know. That sounds a bit weird. A weird way to end your movie.
Yeah, because for the most part, like, I don't know. There are parts I like about that movie, especially the third act. There's like a 20-minute stretch, which I would call phenomenal and captures the spirit of Pulp and captures the spirit of the character. It's this train chase that is just, that's the whole reason to watch the movie is this train chase at the end. But everything leading up to that, like I said, is really pessimistic. It has a very, very slow pace to it, which again is not Pulp at all. Pulp, the whole point of Pulp is, out of the frying pan and into the fire kind of situations. Like Pirates of the Caribbean does capture that well because the things are always happening, and that's the point of Pulp. If you stand around and talk, that's not Pulp. You're not capturing the spirit. That's a different kind of movie.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I do see what you mean. I mean, I I will obviously go on record to say that I love Pirates of the Caribbean. I did an episode on it with Sade from Offscreen Babble, and I know you've spoken to Sade on this very show. And I mean, we were kind of completely in agreement on how we felt about Pirates of the Caribbean. But I think obviously I wasn't really looking at Pirates of the Caribbean with like pulp goggles in a way. I just kind of look at it as more of a pirate kind of romp. And so, unlike you, I liked Captain Jack Sparrow, but I wasn't that keen on Orlando Bloom. But I suppose in a pulp kind of scenario, Orlando Bloom's probably more of the sort of dashing hero kind of vein, I guess. Um, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's why I like him a little bit better because
Mm,
he feels a little more like the type of character I want to see. Like I
mm,
said, I don't know why. it's weird to me that Gore Verbinski wants to keep making these types of movies, but at the same time, it feels like he doesn't necessarily respect the genre because he's always trying to turn it into something else and almost make fun of it in a way.
Mm.
I don't know, because like I said, I do like parts of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Actually, looking up on my shelf, I own the first three movies because I found them at the flea market for quite cheap. And like there are parts I really do like and parts that make me laugh and whatnot. I just have a problem with the way they decided to go with the Jack Sparrow character, especially when you keep going on in the movies, he becomes more and more of the main character because of course his popularity in pop culture.
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, regardless of what we might want as fans of a particular genre or a particular style of movie making or anything, at the end of the day, it's all about the money. And if something sells in Hollywood, they're going to want to make more of it because they're going to want to make more money. And I think sometimes the argument of what makes the most money, I think you can look at any kind of genre of movies, and the ones that tend to make the most money are the ones that are probably a bit um not what we would kind of want to see so much in our cinema. Maybe a lot of like big explosions, and I love a big explosion more than the next person, but I kind of feel like a lot of cinema is now kind of aimed more at the sort of a mass market rather than those specific areas of excellence. But I think that you could kind of argue that about any kind of commercial venture, I guess. But yeah, it's all about wherever the money is, and I think that once they realised Pirates of the Caribbean was popular, they were like, well, let's just repeat and repeat and repeat and make as much money as possible. So it dilutes uh, the original premise, really, is what I'm trying to say, I think.
Yeah, and I don't like because I actually really did enjoy listening to your episode with Sade. I thought it was really cute how like the two of you were kind of gawking over this adventure pulp, and it was a very nice. I mean, it was a very long episode. It was like what
Yep.
3 hours, right? But it was like I said,
Yeah.
I listened to it in shifts, obviously, uh, because it was just so long. But it was really enjoyable. Like I thought, even if I don't love these movies, it's still nice to hear the two of you talk about the love for it. And
Yeah.
um I actually do hope they reboot the Pirates of the Caribbean movies like they were talking about. It would be nice to have it with kind of a fresh set of characters, a fresh look to it. I would like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think any kind of the way I look at like reboots and remakes and stuff like that is I genuinely believe there has to be a good reason to do so. And I kind of felt with the Mummy specific, and I know the Mummy is itself a remake, so it's kind of a bad example, but because it's a movie that I hold in such high regard, and then they obviously in 2017 they decided to do a remake in this sort of dark universe thing with Tom Cruise, and it just didn't capture any of the charm of the original. It was almost like they just made a generic action movie that just happened to have a mummy in it. And it kind of, I think that's what I'm trying to say about, when it's all about money making, and it essentially diluted what was so great about the original. And if they do make a new Pirates of the Caribbean, which, I mean, let's be honest, they probably will, because this is Hollywood and of course they're going to want to make money. But I really hope that they actually put a bit of thought into it, and don't just kind of go for the generic action remake. And they actually, do you know what, with the same sort of characters, I really hope they actually put some really good thought into it, and actually make it worth our time and our money, because the Mummy 2017 really is not.
No, yeah, I agree. I didn't like the 2017 Mummy either. It really felt like they were trying to make a Tom Cruise movie first and a Mummy movie second.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think we have to see how Jungle Cruise does first. I think Jungle Cruise has a lot more on its shoulders than people probably know because obviously the they probably pushed it back for several reasons. They're trying to make it the best vehicle for these, two stars that they can. And I mean, if they're doing it to improve the film, I'm more than okay with that. Obviously, they're a little cautious, but I feel like if Jungle Cruise does well, I think there is a higher possibility of us seeing another Pirates of the Caribbean movie.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's also a possibility as well. And something that I actually really kind of hope for is, maybe we will see more of a character like John Carter. Maybe not in the same kind of vein as the original John Carter movie, but maybe something that, because I can't remember. I did think I did mention in the episode, but I can't remember if I don't think Disney have the rights to that character anymore. I think it's lapsed, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure where the rights for that character are at the moment. But I certainly think that I think I agree with you that a lot rests on Jungle Cruise, not just from a pulp perspective, but also from a kind of original idea perspective as well, because obviously it's based on a ride, but otherwise it's something new. It is based on, obviously, pulp cinema kind of going back, but otherwise it's new characters, it's a new story, and there's a distinct lack of originality in Hollywood nowadays. So anything that is new and original, I think we have to embrace it. I think we have to, for the pure sake of cinema going forward.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. Um, yeah. So I don't. I hope it does well. It comes out with July, if I'm correct. Which is too long to wait for me because obviously I love watching these kind of movies on the big screen. And the last one we got was the Dora movie, which I absolutely loved, and I definitely want to go see that one again. Whenever it comes out on DVD around here. Did you ever get around to seeing the Dora movie?
No, I didn't, but I heard such wonderful things, especially about the lead actress, the actress who played Dora, basically saying that she is basically one to watch for the future. And yeah, it's definitely something. It's obviously not in cinemas here anymore, but hopefully it'll be out on streaming or something soon, because I'm really interested to watch it.
I mean, obviously, I'm a little biased. I think I enjoyed it more than others did because, I mean, obviously, it is my favorite uh, subgenre of movies, and then also seeing that type of movie with people that look like they could be, members of my family, people speaking Spanish, and an adventure pulp movie. It was a really wonderful experience to see that in the theater.
Mm. Yeah, and I think, everyone always kind of says it, but I don't think anyone actually kind of understands, unless they're in the situation, that representation is important. And, you don't, if you are represented on the screen all the time, then you don't care about represent. Do you see what I mean? Like, I think if you're, obviously I'm white, I'm British, but so I see myself probably, well, not as much as maybe a white guy does, but generally I feel like I'm fairly well represented, I guess. But I'm always kind of quite passionate about representation, and because I've always kind of thought that it's so important, especially for young kids, people, growing up, and it's so important to be able to see yourself and to be able to um step in someone else's shoes in a way, and have that kind of adventure feel like it could happen to them. And so, from kind of your point of view, I completely understand why you would hold a movie like Dora in such high regard, because it's almost like it's made for you. um but for me, I'm like, well, when I think of a movie like Dora, which obviously I haven't seen but I've heard about, I see obviously great representation for women, and young girls. And for me, that's something that I'm really passionate about, to see, great representation for women in film, just generally, and great female characters. And it's something that I really, really enjoy watching, and thinking, when I was watching Edge of Tomorrow, thinking, maybe I could be Rita Vrataski. How cool would that be? Um, and I think it's so important, and it's something that I think Hollywood is waking up to now, but it's taking a long time, and it's taken a long time, I think, to kind of get here. But I think slowly but surely, movies like Dora and like Black Panther and just anything that shows someone other than a white person on screen, or a cis person or anything. I think Hollywood is making strides, but they're not quite big enough. I would like them to be bigger, but I think we are getting there. It's just slow and steady.
Exactly. I like how you brought that up about her being a female protagonist, because that's definitely one thing I do like about adventure pulps, that they've never been shy about having the woman be the hero or the protagonist. I mean,
Mm,
obviously, you're going to find stories where there is the kind of damsel in distress situation going on, but even when you look back at like serials from like the 30s and 40s, there are definitely ones starring women where they get to be the hero, and they fight and they can take on someone twice their size, and it's not even a thought, like they just kind of do it. That's what I love about the Black Whip, which is one of my favorite serials, starring Linda Sterling, where she is the sister of basically a Zorro type character. Because at the time, Republic didn't have the rights to Zorro, so he's just a Zorro type character. And then he dies in the first chapter, and then she just automatically takes over and basically starts fighting crime as the Black Whip character. Like, it's not even a thought, it's not even a question. She just does it.
yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it, that way back then women could be so involved in a story, and I don't know what changed sort of over the course of cinema that kind of relinquished the female characters to being like the love interest, or the helper or the receptionist or whatever. And I don't know when specifically that happened, but it does feel very much like there was a point in time where there was a bit more kind of equality in the roles that women were getting, but then that kind of dropped off, and it's only kind of in recent years that that's kind of started to go back up. And it's a really kind of interesting societal question as to what happened in movies. What happened, because it must be a societal thing, because I think Hollywood does try and reflect the society that we live in at the time. But I don't know, it just seems like it was fine for women to sort of have a place, and then it kind of, they were just the receptionist, or the unnamed wife, or, and now, yeah, I find it all a bit odd. I've got to be honest. I don't understand where it's all come from, but I'm really happy to see um things like Jungle Cruise, where the like I said, the focus of the trailer for me was on Emily Blunt. And if Emily Blunt can't sell a movie, then The Rock can't. I mean, the Rock can sell a movie, but I think this being primarily Emily Blunt's trailer, I think is really, really interesting me, because I was immediately more interested in her character than I was with his, because her character spoke to me a bit more, did a little bit more in the trailer. But I think, like you said, I think we're going to see. Um, but yeah, it's so important, I think, to have that representation. It's just frustrating sometimes that these things tend to take quite a long time. Um, like the whole Black Widow getting her own movie, like that should have happened years ago. Like, why did that not happen? And now all of a sudden she is finally getting a movie, despite certain circumstances, because I don't want to spoil anything. But yeah, it's very strange. Look, what is the mentality? I don't understand it.
So basically, more or less, because I'm not an expert on this by any means, but I read some of. I still need to finish that. I'm such a bad reader, but I've read part of Alicia Malone's book Backwards and in Heels, and even Fritzy Kramer movie Silently on Twitter talks about this a lot too. Basically, in the silent era, there actually were a lot of women who did own their own studios and did direct films and did produce films, and the film industry actually did have a lot of women in these roles. But then at the late 20s, early 30s, when sound technology came around, men found that as an opportunity to push women out because these studios couldn't all afford to go from silent films to this new sound technology because it was such a drastic change and it was, so expensive. And so they just found it as a way to push all these women out of the industry. And I've even read stories, like I said in that book, of like women who like came from like Europe or something, and they were, directing here, and they had to go back home for some reason, and then they come back to Hollywood, and like it turns out that like their films were just straight up destroyed because, oh well, we're not going to keep these in storage for much longer, like we don't care.
What was that book again? Sorry.
Backwards and in Heels by Alicia Malone. She talks about women in film. It's a really good book. Like I said, I've only read the first section of it, but she goes into multiple stories of female filmmakers in the beginning of the book and like their experiences and I mean, what should be their legacy, but sadly isn't now because we don't talk about them. Because, like I said, they were pushed out of the industry. Like some of their films were even like destroyed that like you can't even find anymore. It basically that's what happened is men slowly over those decades kind of forced women out to the point where it's crazy when you look at it today that there were probably more women directing films in the teens and the 20s than there are now.
That is crazy. I had literally had no idea. I'm really interested to read that book. I might see if I can find it. I'm sure Amazon stock it.
Oh yeah,
I
I have it on Kindle. That's how I'm reading it. So definitely.
Oh, okay, brilliant. Yeah, I'll definitely see if I can find a copy of that because that sounds really interesting. Um, and yeah, it's the amount of interesting stories I think that could come out of Hollywood that just haven't. I mean, you could probably write several books about all of the secrets and stuff that are in Hollywood. But yeah, that's really fascinating, actually. Thank you for recommending that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like I said, that's the very sad history of what happened. Because I mean, once you started talking about why, it all changed. Like I instantly remembered, like this is sadly why, because as
Mm.
much as sound was a step forward, in film that was taken, it definitely ended up hurting a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it.
Ha! That's when you made a joke. I like that.
Oh, I wasn't even trying. I wondered why you just went ha, and I, I did. That was a completely unintentional joke. I'm not that funny.
It was a pretty decent one though. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Sometimes that happens. Like I'll just randomly say something, and I won't know it's a joke. It just kind of comes out of my mouth. But yeah, that was completely intentional. I'm really funny.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, that's why I'm leaving that part in. I'm not even gonna edit it out. It was perfect timing.
Thank you.
So, is there any movies that you're working on for the future that you're allowed to talk about, or is it all hush hush about the podcast?
I mean, I always try not to spoil too much. I I kind of I do plan my schedule quite far in advance. And I think I surprise people with how far in advance I book things. And I'm also quite mindful that because I do everything on my own, as you know, doing everything on your own as well, things take time and you need to make time for yourself and make sure that, you're well and everything, and that you see family and friends and all that sort of thing. So I schedule quite far in advance. So my schedule currently is booked up until probably January-ish for me, and then I've got guests booked pretty much all the way through to sort of May of next year, because I have to limit all of that sort of stuff because I can't. you know, you mentioned earlier about the chat I had with Sade from Offscreen Babble, and obviously that was 3 hours long, and I have tried to condense them down a little, but I find that if I've got someone like Sade on, she's very easy to talk to, and we get on very well. We have a very natural rapport with each other, and so it's very easy to just kind of feel like you're just having a 3 hour chat with a friend. And I kind of forget sometimes that I'm actually recording a podcast. So yeah, my next episode. So I've just released Edge of Tomorrow. My next one is going to be on Legally Blonde, which is a complete diversion from the last couple of episodes I've done. Obviously, I've done Edge of Tomorrow. I've done Logan. You know, really kind of Logan, obviously, really serious, gritty comic book, makes me cry a lot, and Edge of Tomorrow sort of very action sci-fi based, and then Legally Blonde kind of just came out of nowhere, and I feel like with Legally Blonde specifically, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the history of blondes in cinema, because I think blonde actresses over the years have kind of fallen into certain categories, you know, with the dumb blonde or the icy blonde, or I think there's another one as well. There's 3 categories that they normally fall into, but I feel like Legally Blonde is a really good excuse to kind of look into maybe the history of blondes in cinema, perhaps, and also about how a movie like Legally Blonde is. I think a lot of people kind of see it as just a bit of a silly comedy, but I think it actually has a lot more to it than what people think, and I think it's more feminist than people think as well. So I'm really quite interested to look into Legally Blonde, and then but the one after that is a complete secret, and I can't tell you anything because that's the one I'm doing for Halloween. So again, it's different. I yeah, I think it's different to what people think I'm going to do, but it is Halloween ish. So.
Okay, that's really interesting because I haven't watched Legally Blonde since I think it came out on DVD originally, so it's been a while. But I that's a fascinating angle. I love that you're gonna go through the history of how women like that have been portrayed in film. Yeah, that's wonderful. I can't wait to listen to that episode.
Thank you. I always try to think outside the box a little bit, because I think it's really easy to just kind of review Legally Blonde and sort of talk about what Elle does, you know, to get into Harvard Law and all of that. And I think from a legal point of view, I don't think the movie is especially accurate when it comes to the portrayal of law. But I'm not a legal expert, so I kind of feel like I'm going to stick with the stuff that I feel more comfortable with and that I feel like I can actually maybe understand a little bit more other than the practice of law. So I felt like it was a natural progression to just kind of look at blondes. You know, some of the most famous actresses in the world were very famous blondes. So obviously I want to talk about people like Marilyn Monroe, and Sharon Stone, you know, people who've really kind of made being blonde their trademark. So we'll see kind of what sort of spanning, you know, because I think you could quite easily start in the 30s, you know, with I think a movie came out in the 30s. I think it was called Platinum Blonde, and I think that was the very first instance of like this kind of very depiction of like a very blonde specific character. And I think it might have been Jean Harlow, but I'm not 100% on whether it was Jean Harlow or not, but I think it might have been Jean Harlow. So I might kind of go from Jean Harlow kind of all the way through.
Okay. Yeah, again, that makes sense because again, the 30s was that first decade of, guys taking over after they, pushed women out after the silent era. So it makes sense that it would have started then.
Mm. Yeah, and it's especially interesting now that I've spoken to you and obviously you've explained that, because I think that's quite an interesting angle to look at, is that obviously if women were being forced out sort of just before the 30s, and then all of a sudden these specific stereotypes of women kind of all of a sudden came into these movies kind of from that period onwards, I think that's quite an interesting angle to look at as to why that could possibly be. But yeah, I mean, the episode will primarily focus on Legally Blonde, but I'd like to talk a little bit about all of that as well.
All right, cool. Yeah, that's again, that sounds really cool. Um, there's one more thing about Legally Blonde. I don't know if it was the same over there in the UK as it was in the US, but I remember the DVD when we had rented it. It was a double-sided DVD. I don't know if you have those over there too, where one side was the full screen version and one side was the widescreen version because people, I mean, even today, people still hate the black bars at the top and the bottom.
We used to have, I don't know if they still produce DVDs like that, but I do remember the double sided DVDs because I remember they were quite big, like around that time that Legally Blonde came out, kind of the early 2000s kind of era. I do remember this really big deal about having these double sided DVDs. And obviously, like you say, one side would be um, with the black bars and one side would be without. But I don't think I've got an old copy of Legally Blonde. I'll have to check it, but I don't think it's double sided because I've had it for a long time. But I think it's just a normal DVD. But but yeah, it's one of the few DVDs that grace my shelf. It's one of those things where I'll only buy specific films on DVD or Blu-ray if I really really love them. Um, and Legally Blonde has always been on my DVD shelf, so that's how much I love it.
All right. Well, I think this was a really good chat. I think we'll probably wrap up at this point. Thank you so much for being here. This has been really wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me. And I know that we originally planned this in, I think it was August, wasn't it, that
Yeah.
we originally planned this? And we had technical issues on my side. I hold my hands up. Technical issues on my side. But thank you so much for being so flexible and obviously agreeing to reschedule because it's been so great to talk to you.
All right. So thank you everybody for listening. If you want to listen to M's podcast, it will be in the description of the YouTube version of this. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, go into the description. Her Twitter will be on there, and her podcast. Please check it out. It's a really good podcast, especially that Pleasantville episode. I think that's still my favorite episode of all of them.
Oh, I love Pleasantville so much. It's actually one of my lowest kind of downloaded episodes. So I'd really love it if people could give Pleasantville some more love.
Yes, please do that, everybody. So goodbye, everybody.
Bye.